Universal Studios Florida is a bit of a strange park right now. It has a lot of properties thrown together in a layout that wasn't really built for them. But among these properties, there's one that always seems to stand out as the strangest to both the average theme park guest and even the seasoned enthusiast. Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon might be the most puzzling brand for a theme park ride ever. It's not that Jimmy Fallon is featured in a ride. His name is on it. His face is on it. He is the brand, not just a character. Add in that the ride based off him and his show came as the prime of late night TV was clearly in the rear view, and you get a ride that never quite made sense. But it's within that confusion that the picture of a transitional era for the Universal theme parks becomes clear. To get to a Jimmy Fallon ride, we have to start somewhere. Back on opening day of Universal Studios Florida in 1990, the back left corner of the park was home to a far more iconic brand. When Universal was planning for what movies could come to the New York theme section of their new backlot theme park hybrid, two movies instantly came to mind. The first being King Kong, which already had the wildly successful tram tour scene over in Hollywood. The second wasn't something that Universal themselves had the rights to, but it was such a cultural phenomenon that they knew it had to have a home in the park. Ghostbusters was huge. While Jaws had started the blockbuster era in 1975, Ghostbusters would expand on what it meant to be a blockbuster. After the original movie's release in 1984, it became a cultural phenomenon with the TV series, comics, video games, board games, merchandise, and a sequel shortly after in 1989. If you said, "Who are you going to call on the street in the 80s?" someone was going to yell Ghostbusters back. It's like everyone in the country went to Penn State.
On your next vacation, don't miss the world's premier movie attraction, Universal Studios Florida. You'll face the fury of King Kong. Join the Ghostbusters. Nickelodeon in action. More movie production than at any studio in Florida. Go back to the future. Don't settle for an imitation. Come to Universal Studios in Orlando, the only place on earth where you can ride the movies. For our brochure and special savings, call 1-900-884-STAR.
Universal worked out a deal to license the Ghostbusters characters to their new theme park, cementing them as one of the iconic opening day properties at Universal Studios Florida. The Ghostbusters, however, wouldn't get a ride at the park, and instead got a show. The Ghostbusters Spooktacular would combine live actors with a variety of special effects to bring the movie to life in front of guests' eyes. The first iteration of the show would make itself almost a transition from Production Central in the New York City facades that the show sat between. It did this with the setup that a tour guide was going over the behind the scenes of the movie on the set before Slimer appeared on stage by way of an absolutely massive Pepper's Ghost effect, similar to that of the Haunted Mansion. An unhappy Gozer unleashes a torrent of ghosts after the tour guide before opening the temple doors to reveal herself. The Ghostbusters answer the call and show up as the tour guide is being tormented by Gozer. In their comedic style, the Ghostbusters take down the various ghosts around the set with their proton packs. Just as things seem safe, Gozer reappears and captures the tour guide. Then an absolutely enormous Stay Puft Marshmallow Man appears looming over the stage, ready to wreak havoc on the Ghostbusters. But they're able to melt him in the nick of time, simultaneously rescuing the tour guide. Things wrap up with the iconic theme song and a shout out to Columbia Pictures. Only a few years after opening, however, the show would receive a revamp. This revamp changed the ride from a behind-the-scenes tour guide setup to something more in line with the Ride the Movies concept that the rest of the park had. In this second version, Louis Tully from the movie sets the stage in a new pre-show where his job is to try to sell ghost-busting equipment to guests, even bringing up selected members of the audience for comedic demonstrations. When the show moved into the main theater, Tully confronts Walter Peck, who is trying to shut down the Ghostbusters since he doesn't believe in ghosts. Following this, the rest of the show stayed essentially the same, with all the effects and action of the original iteration. Ghostbusters Spooktacular and the movie as a whole were still popular 6 years into its run at the park. However, it would still close in November of 1996, and with it, the Ghostbusters would fade from Universal Studios Florida. What made Universal get rid of Ghostbusters seemingly so quick? Well, there's not one simple answer. It boils down to the strategy of Universal executives at the time. At the time, Universal had already been incredibly ambitious in the creation of the park, so there was a willingness to take big swings to keep the park relevant. They felt a constant pressure to push the envelope with new rides and new technology to prove themselves in a market so dominated by Disney. While Disney had the luxury of a 2-decade head start to build nostalgia towards their rides, Universal didn't see that nostalgia extending into their offerings as much. So that's why when Universal Pictures released Twister in 1996 and it became the 10th highest grossing film at the time, there was a strong desire to strike while the iron was hot and get it into the park at any cost. Universal also likely saw this as a good long-term investment. By replacing a brand they would need to pay licensing fees on with one that they owned, they would be able to save money and maintain relevance in their new, but sure to be long-lasting movie. Plus, the show building was essentially a big box already built to code for various special effects, making the investment in a new attraction cheaper. Oh, and the whole Islands of Adventure project taking place next door, and the thought that the existing park would need new investment in order to not be cannibalized by islands. By 1998, Ghostbusters was a faint memory, aside from a few Easter eggs, and in its place was Twister Ride It Out.
Wow, let's do that again!
New Twister. It's gonna blow you away. Only at Universal Studios Florida. Come ride it out.
Twister continued to ride the line between Ride the Movies and the behind the scenes of movie making by placing guests in a special effects demonstration mirroring that of the film itself. However, it wouldn't fit in basically at all with the New York landscape, so its marquee was placed just at the end of Production Central instead to thematically tie the ride to the park. The ride experience would start in the outdoor queue behind the still-standing Ghostbusters firehouse facade. Various movie props were scattered around the outdoor queue, including some vehicles. Next, you'd enter a pre-show room where clips from the movie would play across 2 separate screens. Bill Paxton in a blue shirt would then set the scene for how intense real-life tornadoes can be. Then, on the other screen, Helen Hunt gives the basic premise of the movie's plot. There's a rumor that's been around for ages that the 2 actors had a massive falling out on set and refused to film together ever again, which is why this pre-show is the way it is. After more movie clips, guests are awkwardly invited to continue and experience a Twister for themselves. After the pre-show, guests walk through a ravaged recreation of Aunt Meg's house. This hallway featured a second pre-show with more of a focus on the filmmaking techniques and practical effects that were used to create the movie. Guests are then ushered quickly onto the observation decks overlooking the drive-in theater from the movie. The show begins quickly with lightning splitting a tree in half as a projection of a tornado forming shows in the distance. As it approaches the drive-in, it suddenly goes from projection to reality in front of the guests as various props begin shaking and exploding. The Dorothy prop from the movie lifts up and flies in front of the guests. Continuing the destruction, the drive-in sign splits in half dramatically, followed by a fake cow getting sucked into the tornado. Then, the roof above guests raises as if it had been broken from the storm, leaving guests feeling more vulnerable as a truck slides into gas pumps just in front of them. Gasoline begins leaking onto the floor and catches on fire, which merges with the vortex to create a massive fireball. As the tornado dissipates, the roof above guests falls back down and the floor beneath them drops slightly to give one final spook. Guests are then ushered out and into the Aftermath gift shop to purchase Twister merchandise. Universal was able to ease the sting of losing Ghostbusters with such a unique spectacle of effects that guests could only find at Universal. While Ghostbusters effects weren't revolutionary, the scale they were achieved at was. With Twister Ride It Out, the effects themselves being pulled off in a theme park were revolutionary. So revolutionary, in fact, that it spawned a lawsuit just prior to opening from ReallyFX, saying that Universal copied their system of using common components to create a realistic-looking tornado on set. This lawsuit ended up quietly getting settled before any verdict, but it's presumed Universal walked away with a favorable outcome, and the attraction would open and operate without issue related to this. While Twister Ride It Out was a really unique and innovative experience, it ironically wasn't a ride despite the name. It was best described as a special effects demonstration, and best categorized as a show in the park's lineup. At the same time, this was a solid fit for the more studio and movie-making focus of the park as a whole. However, the issue with the special effects demonstration is it's something with an expiration date. Twister Ride It Out was incredibly expensive to run, and the longer it ran, the more outdated it felt. The point of the show was the shock value, but as guests returned to the resort, that shock value would dissipate. Additionally, Twister the movie didn't have nearly the staying power that Universal expected. Even with a solid sequel released in 2024, the franchise was never able to get a foothold in pop culture like the original Universal Studios Florida movies. Twister as an attraction is a unique case where something having a shelf life wasn't just an excuse for Universal to remove it. Its effects truly had a shelf life, so combined with everything else, it was due for a replacement. Speaking of everything else, the park and company that Twister Ride It Out opened with were drastically different by the time it came to replace it. Halfway through its life, Twister got a new neighbor that would muddy the waters on the land it sat in. When the Wizarding World of Harry Potter Hogsmeade was finishing development, Universal executives knew they needed to bring a major addition to the other park at the resort to try and offset the new land. Unfortunately, at this time, Universal didn't really have a strong direction for Universal Studios Florida. While Ride the Movies was still present, the lack of active productions had essentially made the production central land a bit confused, to say the least. The park had just ripped out another of the classic rides, with The Simpsons replacing Back to the Future, following in the footsteps of both King Kong and Ghostbusters. So what was Universal going to build to help reinvigorate Production Central and disperse crowds from the revolutionary Wizarding World?
It's something, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is. Check out those spikes. They can really hurt.
The coaster. Universal's new coaster. Mm-hmm. Not only does it let you pick your own music, it features the biggest non-inverted loop ever.
What does that mean in English?
It means you're inside the loop until you get to the top, and then you whip outside before twisting back in, all at 65 miles per hour.
I met a woman who could do that once. I did.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, I did. She was with the circus, okay? If those ladies can grow beards, they can do anything.
High tech meets hard rock. The new Rip Ride Rockit coaster at Universal.
Universal decided to build this big coaster, Rip Ride Rockit, or as I call it, Rip Ride Recession. The left edge of the park would essentially be cut off by an out-and-back coaster that would divorce the sound stages from the park itself. The coaster was themed, albeit very loosely, to the production of music videos, using the coaster to capture guest performances. Rip Ride Rockit doesn't have an intricate theme. It was marketed Thrills First, which just didn't match what Universal was doing at Islands of Adventure. It felt like when Six Flags put a little extra effort into theming a coaster, and not up to the standard that Universal had set previously. Because of this, Rip Ride Rockit wasn't really a huge success at drawing crowds away from Hogsmeade, and instead has become kind of this lasting memory of the Universal before Harry Potter. But perhaps the most underrated but impactful parts of Rip Ride Rockit's addition was the Music Plaza replacing the graveyard. On the one hand, this has given Universal a true stage for Mardi Gras concerts and replaced an antiquated part of the park with much less of an eyesore. But at the same time though, this also stripped away the last core element of the Production Central theme. This meant that even though Twister fit in when it opened, its over-the-top billboard marquee now loomed really awkwardly over a concert stage and plaza that just didn't match its energy.
For this morning's Mover and Shaker, it is Comcast CEO Brian Roberts, whose proposed merger with NBC Universal could be approved by regulators today. According to people close to the deal, 4 of the 5 members of the Federal Communications Commission, that is the FCC, may vote for the merger. The Justice Department is still reviewing the deal. Remember, more than a year ago, Roberts announced Comcast agreed to acquire the NBC network, cable channels such as MSNBC and USA Network, as well as a library of more than 4,000 movies. Regulators could still force Comcast to share programming with its online rivals.
Just months after Rip Ride Rockit would open, Comcast announced its plan to acquire a 51% stake in NBC Universal. This wasn't a shock to the entertainment industry, as Comcast had attempted a hostile takeover of Disney just a few years prior, so their desires to grow in the consumer entertainment space were well known by this point. For the parks, this meant that Comcast would take over the 50% controlling interest in the Orlando resort that NBC Universal had previously. Comcast would still have to work alongside Blackstone Capital Partners for the resort, and they're a private equity firm that acquired their stake through a sale of the Rank organization, who had originally helped Universal finance the resort. Blackstone's time with the parks is fascinating and could be a video itself because, on the one hand, their time at the helm led to the most stagnant era in the resort's history, while on the other hand, they were there for the licensing and development of the Wizarding World, which would change the direction of the resort forever. Anyways, Comcast and the Blackstone Group reportedly didn't really like the dynamics that came with sharing custody of the resort, and as a result, Comcast would buy out Blackstone's 50% stake for $1 billion, giving Comcast 100% ownership. This was the first time Universal Orlando had a singular owner, and Comcast wasn't going to spend $1 billion to not heavily leverage their new asset. The parks gave Comcast something they desperately needed, an outlet to build positive relationships with consumers. Comcast had a massively negative brand perception in the 2000s. They were constantly winning awards for the worst company in America. The parks were just one aspect of a public relations strategy that Comcast was starting to implement in the early 2010s to help ease their reputation. For starters, Comcast would start taking away their branding from their direct-to-consumer products like cable and internet, rebranding those services under the new Xfinity name. That way, if consumers had a negative experience with Xfinity, the other arms of Comcast would not be roped in as heavily. Comcast saw the Universal parks a lot like how Michael Eisner saw the Disney parks, as synergy machines that had the power to turn fans into fanatics. So for Comcast, it was a no-brainer to start finding new ways to leverage these parks to showcase their newly acquired media companies, with the hope consumers would associate the Comcast name with their new, fun direction.
In case you're just joining us, this is Tonight. And I can't think of too much to tell you about it, except I want to give you the bad news first. This program is going to go on forever. Boy, you think you're tired now.
So now we meet the second part of this synergy story, the American institution that is late night television. After Faye Emerson had brought a variety show beyond the 11 p.m. time slot and established the building blocks for what would become late night talk shows, NBC would use those building blocks to create The Tonight Show in 1954. The show found rapid success and became a ritual for many. The show was set up in a way where you felt a connection to the host specifically, as he joked with you about the news of the day and the happenings in pop culture. It was a gathering place for celebrities to humanize themselves and break down the wall between pop culture and the people who consumed it. The Tonight Show wasn't just a hit, it was revolutionary and it shaped culture. The Tonight Show itself was such an establishment that the other major networks at the time did try to create their own late night success. But they couldn't hold a candle to NBC, so much so that they had to try counter-programming instead of imitation. It took until the 90s for them to successfully mirror The Tonight Show with hosts that drew away some of the audience from NBC. By the time Comcast acquired NBC Universal, the media landscape was changing, and so was the host of The Tonight Show. Jay Leno had been the host of the show since 1992, and in 2004, he and NBC established Conan O'Brien as his successor, with a plan in place to change the guard gracefully in 2009, right around the acquisition. However, Jay Leno wasn't actually ready to retire, and he was given a time slot right before Conan for a new show. Both of these shows saw ratings decline from what was previously in their time slots, and this had new executives worried and antsy. Not wanting to lose the cash cow that was The Tonight Show, NBC would very controversially, in so many words, push Conan out of hosting the show, and bring back Jay Leno just 8 months later. This showed how much value the new executives at Comcast placed in the show, and their immense fear of its value waning as the media landscape was already shifting around it. The internet was taking away the attention of a lot of potential younger late-night viewers, which originally worried networks. However, by the early 2010s, the internet and late night existed in a very symbiotic relationship. Clips from late night suddenly reached an entirely new audience on YouTube and created a new revenue stream. People who didn't want to religiously tune in live at 11:30 at night were still able to enjoy the parts of the format that intrigued them. Late night as a format was essentially a clip factory for YouTube that could outpace any content creator at the time. So with this new younger audience growing, NBC was worried. The Conan drama had damaged the relationship between Jay Leno and his audience, and the show never got the same foothold it had before he left the first time. Additionally, Conan actually appealed more to the younger demographic, whereas Leno's target demographic was much older and less online, which meant diminishing viewership. NBC was once again looking for a new way to keep The Tonight Show as the crown jewel of the network. Luckily, NBC had someone in mind.
NBC will usher in a new late-night lineup next year. The network has officially announced its plan to put Jimmy Fallon in Conan O'Brien's seat when O'Brien replaces Jay Leno on The Tonight Show in 2009. Fallon was out and about for the NBC promotional upfronts yesterday after the news hit. The co-chairman of NBC Entertainment and Universal Media Studios says Fallon will, quote, bring a new generation of fans to late night. NBC has not announced when Late Night with Jimmy Fallon will premiere. A new Miley Cyrus single is hitting the airwaves. The song is called 7 Things.
Jimmy Fallon!
Jimmy Fallon had taken over Late Night, which is a show that airs after The Tonight Show from Conan, after Conan was promoted and then ousted. He was a strange choice for the role, all things considered, as he had just come off a string of box office failures and his career seemed stagnant. Prior to his film career, he was a standout on SNL for 6 years, including anchoring Weekend Update, but nevertheless, most expected the show to fail. However, even after a bit of a shaky start, Jimmy found a successful format. He avoided a lot of the serious news and made the show feel like a party. It was about fun segments that viewers could look forward to watching their favorite celebrities participate in, and just watch Jimmy have a fun time talking with them. This also meant that the show was even more perfectly translated to the internet. The game segments were quick, fun, and unique videos that people wanted to watch and share. He had huge hits like the history of rap with Justin Timberlake that went incredibly viral and overshadowed what was happening on the major late night shows. Jimmy was able to connect with the same age group that Conan did in a different way that stood out from the rest of late night. He had successfully created an evolution of the format that excelled in the digital world. This is where the two stories collide. In 2010, Late Night with Jimmy Fallon was just about a year into its run and showing strong signs of success. At the same time, Comcast was nearly finished acquiring complete ownership of the Universal Orlando Resort. Jimmy remembered visiting his childhood theme park, Six Flags Great Escape, and the fun it brought him. The same fun he tried to bring to his shows. So, somewhat jokingly, he worked on a pitch for a theme park ride of his own, alongside his late night riders. The idea was simple. Join Jimmy on a hang gliding tour over the sights of New York City where antics would ensue in late night fashion. However, when it was pitched to Mark Woodbury, he politely but firmly said no. Universal Creative was already under a massive influx of new projects as a result of new ownership. Even at that point, just in Universal Studios Florida, Minion Mayhem, Transformers, Springfield, and Diagon Alley were all in some form of development, and taking up a huge amount of resources. The last thing they wanted to hear was a pitch for a Jimmy Fallon simulator. However, in 2011, over in Hollywood, Universal was looking to revamp and bring a fresh face to their studio tours video segments. With the success of the show, especially online, Jimmy was chosen to bring some humor and celebrity to the video portions of the tour that would appeal to a broad audience. This choice made it clear that even with his pitch being shot down, the company as a whole saw him as a rising star. As the 2010s continued on, Jimmy Fallon was obviously primed and ready to take over The Tonight Show. By 2013, NBC was concerned with Jimmy Kimmel at ABC starting to eat into their viewership with a younger audience, and Jay Leno was feeling ready to retire for real this time. On February 17, 2014, The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon would air its first episode. The show moved back to filming in New York City for the first time since 1973, keeping Fallon in his home state.
Welcome to The Tonight Show. This is the first Tonight Show broadcast from New York in over 40 years. Welcome. I'm Jimmy Fallon, and I'll be your host for now.
The show would essentially be what he did on Late Night at an earlier time slot with higher production value, and it continued to find success. He had found his strengths as a host, and those were having fun and entertaining instead of providing news and commentary. Ratings for the show stayed strong, and online viewership escalated exponentially. For NBC, they had found the next face of their network and their savior for the late night format. At the same time in the parks, Comcast had found relative success with bringing a variety of 3D and simulator rides into the parks. These were cheaper additions that brought the parks up to a more modern standard, which led to them being the ride system of choice at the time. This made Universal think back to the pitch from Jimmy for a comedic tour of New York City. The more they thought about it, the more sense it started to make. Twister was a good experience, but by 2014, its age was showing. Its ridership was consistently dropping, and it didn't fit into the land around it anymore. But you know what would add a brand new ride that fit the New York land perfectly and would feature essentially the new mascot of the broadcast arm of the company? The Jimmy Fallon ride.
In 2017, we're going to have our very own ride at Universal Orlando Resort. Now, this is real. It's called Race Through New York, starring Jimmy Fallon. That's what it is. Real deal. So, when in Orlando, visit Universal Studios and ask for Babs.
Jimmy Fallon took to The Tonight Show on October 27, 2015, to officially announce the new ride, now working under the name Race Through New York, starring Jimmy Fallon. At the same time, Universal would announce that the ride was taking the place of Twister Ride It Out, which would close just a few days later on November 1st, 2015. With the announcement, Universal said the ride would open in 2017, which would turn out to be a more ambitious timeline than they were expecting. Construction walls went up fast around Soundstage 50, and the inside of the building was gutted quickly. Media for the ride was being filmed rapidly at Studio 8H at 30 Rock, where SNL's filmed, and additional recording was done at studios in Vancouver, with The Tonight Show and Universal sharing peeks into the process on social media throughout the construction. Back in Orlando, Soundstage 50 was starting to look very different. Race Through New York was not just going to be a new ride in the building, it was going to completely change the shape of the building into a recreation of 30 Rock, the New York City headquarters for NBC where The Tonight Show, SNL, and Late Night all film. By building this more elaborate facade, Universal created a more natural transition from the production areas and the sound stages into the New York land, which was a problem that was present from opening day. Not too far away from the construction site was another ride being built to replace a disaster-themed ride. Fast and Furious Supercharged was announced to be coming to Orlando just 2 months earlier in August of 2015. The ride had just opened as the new finale of the Hollywood Studio Tour that June, and let's just say people weren't happy with it getting cloned. The ride was not great, but at least on the tram tour, it was just one part of the experience and replaced an even worse Fast and Furious experience. In Orlando, it had to stand on its own in a theme park that was filled by this point with other screen-based attractions. Guests knowing exactly what was coming with Fast and Furious and having a good feeling that the Jimmy Fallon ride was also going to be a screen-based simulator turned out to be a breaking point for Universal. Then, even worse woes hit the process. During the construction of the ride, Universal and their selected ride manufacturer, Dynamic Motion Rides, had a falling out over the construction timeline and changes to the ride during this process. Universal sought out another company to finish the project, and there's a good amount of evidence that Peterson Inc. worked on the project following Dynamic Motion Rides. Peterson is mainly a fabricator, but they do have a relationship with Universal to this day, having been involved in the construction of Minecart Madness, which they worked on alongside JR Automation. It's not uncommon for rides like this to have a weird collection of manufacturers, and it's probably likely that Universal themselves also helped bring this project across the finish line. However, in this case, it ended up being a little bit more controversial. Dynamic Motion Rides sued Universal, claiming that they were still owed upwards of $5 million. They also claimed that the ride was operating with their proprietary software, know-how, drawings, and intellectual property. Regardless, after years, the two would reach a settlement, but if I had a nickel for every time an attraction in Soundstage 50 at Universal Studios Florida had a lawsuit over proprietary technology potentially being utilized without permission,
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Thankfully, Peterson, the company who came in to finish the construction of the ride, was able to meet the ambitious timeline, and Universal felt confident enough to have Jimmy announce the grand opening date on January 12th, 2017.
We're very happy to announce the grand opening is going to be Thursday, April 6th. Race Through New York. I cannot wait. It's going to be good, you guys.
Universal Orlando Resort proudly welcomes Jimmy Fallon and his Tonight Show family. Hey, hey.
big moment. I got to take this time and just enjoy this. We have a Tonight Show ride. This is really happening. I want to thank Steve Allen, Jack Parr, Johnny Carson, Conan O'Brien, and Jay Leno. This ride wouldn't be here without you guys. And now I'm going to take a giant pair of scissors and cut this ribbon. Here we go.
5, 4, 3, 2.
On April 6, 2017, the ride would open following a mini parade and ceremony. Unlike other new ride openings in Universal's past, there wasn't a standby line. Instead, it was the first ride to open with the virtual line system. Guests would select a time to return and enter the new Orlando version of 30 Rock. Once inside, the non-traditional queuing system continued. As you enter the lobby, an NBC page hands you a feather with a specific color of the NBC Peacock logo, and then you're invited to peruse the display cases around the lobby. Each case featuring memorabilia from each host of The Tonight Show. This includes Conan O'Brien, which did catch a lot of people by surprise, even if his case is a fraction of the size. One neat detail of these displays is the use of highly directional point speakers that let guests hear the audio from just the display they're in front of. It works so well that I feel like most people don't even think about how there's no mess of audio in that room. Then the lights around the lobby will change colors to match the feather that you have, which means it's time for you to move upstairs. Upstairs, you are first greeted on your left by the studio entrance to the ride. However, you once again have to wait for the color around the room to match that of your feather. On the right of the room is a bunch of seating areas around touchscreen tables loaded with 8-bit Jimmy Fallon games to pass the time. Straight back is another room with a recreation of the monologue stage with seating on the outskirts. Periodically, the Ragtime Gals and Hashtag the Panda will come out onto the stage to entertain guests as they wait. Once it's your turn to ride, you hand over your feather, grab your racing goggles, and get sent to one of 2 pre-show theaters. The pre-show sets up that guests are about to attend a special taping of The Tonight Show, where the studio audience is going to race Jimmy through the most touristy parts of New York City. Tariq from The Roots then raps the safety spiel, followed by an appearance from Sarah and her stepdad Gary, before guests are ushered into the ride vehicle, designed to look like a section of the audience seats at The Tonight Show. Guests buckle in, and the curtain pulls back to reveal The Tonight Show stage. Steve Higgins counts you and Jimmy down as you take off into the back hallways, running into tight pants and nearly hitting Hashtag, causing a spin out onto the streets of New York. After dodging traffic in Times Square surrounded by billboards advertising places on City Walk or other Comcast brands, you enter into the subway tunnels and hitch a ride. Once back up on the street, you nearly run into Sarah, who just bought a basket full of puppies, and Jimmy eating a slice of pizza.
God, what took you so long?
The second half of the race begins by entering flight mode and getting pizza slices thrown at you, with the scent of pepperoni pumped into the room to match. Jimmy breaks the fourth wall by asking what else looks good in 3D before shooting Tonight Show t-shirts at you and encouraging you to buy one in the gift shop. You then dive into the East River, which, gross, and dodge a shark attack before circling around the Statue of Liberty. Fireworks go off around you with the smell of smoke filling the room. Next up is the Empire State Building, where Hashtag the Panda is doing his best King Kong impression as another homage to one of the original rides of Universal Studios Florida.
Hashtag, we're going up the Empire State Building. And why are you 300 feet tall?
Hashtag takes hold of the guests and launches them to the moon.
Thank you, the moon, for turning regular old dirt into moon dust.
Once on the moon, you both board the space train, which, once completed, will be the first ever roller coaster from the moon to the Earth. The track ends, and you and Jimmy are hurtling back to Earth before Jimmy has the bright idea to finally try the Hypertube add-on to the Tonight Rider for the first time. The tube drops the guests right back into 30 Rock, right in front of the finish line, where Jimmy gloats before the audience gives him a final bump, sending him off course and causing the audience to win.
I'm good. Congratulations, guys. We did it. You know I let you win. Well, that was reach me anytime. Have a great day, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Is it popcorn? It's hot, right?
Guest reception to the ride was mixed. While people appreciated the unique queuing system, detailed facade, and family-friendly ride, others weren't happy with yet another screen-based ride, and this time based off an unconventional brand of all things.
Everybody's talking about my tight pants. In Orlando, I got a brand new ride. Everybody's talking about my tight pants. In Orlando, I got a brand new ride.
Race through New York, starring Jimmy Fallon. Come on and take the show for a ride. Only at Universal Orlando Resort. I'll see you at the starting line.
Okay, so let's just jump to the elephant in the room here. It's weird that there's a Jimmy Fallon ride. That's the whole reason I felt like I need to include the whole history here, is that it's just undeniably one of the weirdest themes for a theme park ride ever. But at the same time, I think because of that, it catches a lot more flack than it should. Is it the best ride in the world? No. But is it the worst ride at the park? No. For starters, the queue was and still is so innovative. The dream of so many casual park guests is to be able to sit down in line. While Disney was on an initiative at this time to make queues interactive, Universal took it to a different level. Not only do guests not have to wait in any traditional line other than the busiest times of year in the extended queue, they can also play games, watch live entertainment, and meet a character. There are times where my feather color has been called, and I've chosen to sit and wait until the Ragtime Gals finish their set and then ride the ride. While there definitely is a learning curve to it for new guests, I think the benefits make it easy to not balk at a higher wait time. Even then, the wait time never gets too high because it's a people eater. There are 2 theaters that cycle 72 guests every 5 or so minutes. This capacity, combined with the ride's solid reliability and ability to run just one theater if needed, means that it usually sits around a 15-minute wait on any given day. The ride is also very family friendly. It has a low height requirement and it's not too extreme. I've been able to see like full generation families all ride together, which is something you can't say of a lot of attractions. But beyond being family friendly, it's also one of the most accommodating Universal rides. Its safety restraint is just a seatbelt, and they have extenders if needed, allowing most guests to fit in and ride. While there's definitely a reason to be fond of Twister, it's hard to argue it brought in the same amount of guests that Race Through New York does, even if it's simply just because it's a true ride and not just an experience. But as a ride, I think people don't give it enough credit simply because it came well after the peak of simulators. Universal also didn't help this by advertising it as a flying theater and not a simulator, which on paper, technically true, but also it gave people a false sense of the ride system. It's not Soarin' and it's not Flight of Passage, which opened just over a month after Race Through New York, both of which are seen as true flying theaters and less simulators. They're just not comparable, and these false expectations combined with the stigma for simulators set the ride up for failure. But in a vacuum, the ride is fun. It simulates motion better than most and immerses all guests into the screen more than Simpsons or Minion Mayhem do. I know some people have issues with the 3D, which I luckily don't, but quite frankly, I think the ride could still work in 2D if they wanted to. Beyond the simulator and the screen, the extra effects are all done tastefully. Unlike a lot of Universal Studios Florida rides, the water is a spritz, and it's only when you enter and exit the East River. They could have made it more constant for the shock value, but they didn't. The scents are also just enough to notice, but not distractingly strong. As much as I love the scents on Soarin', they're so strong that it becomes the scene instead of a part of it. I think if more simulators were done like this in Star Tours, there would be less of a negative feeling around them. The other key to the ride being fun is the story. I, like most people, was confused at what the story was even going to be on a Tonight Show ride when it was announced. Like, yeah, the Tonight Show is fun, but how is that ever going to translate to a ride experience? And the key was, it's not a Tonight Show ride. It's a New York ride with references to the Tonight Show, which should have been more obvious from the name and the way Jimmy described it on the show. But at the same time, the idea of a Jimmy Fallon ride is also confusing. In reality, the ride itself is Jimmy at his best, guiding a conversation, moving from scene to scene, and adding a bit of comedy throughout. This for me is where his comedy works best, and it can be a bit more subtle and not in your face. Tight Pants is funnier to me as a quick reference versus a built-out 3-minute long segment that's being done for a 5th time. Because all these references and jokes are tossed together, it makes for a really quick-paced story that I think holds its own regardless of the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show of it all. Now, the pre-show is straight up the Tonight Show, but without fail, people seem to enjoy it whenever I ride. There are far weaker pre-shows, and I never dread watching it before the ride. I also just think more pre-shows should add applause signs like this one. The other part that I want to talk about is that the ride being so focused on New York City itself really goes hand in hand with the 30 Rock exterior of the building serving as this bridge between Production Central and New York. I don't fault executives for looking at Soundstage 50 and seeing this as a perfect fit, because in a lot of ways it is. Is it an e-ticket solution to the problem? No. But does every edition need to be an e-ticket? Also no. The ride is such a good representation of New York City that it literally made me nostalgic. I have a ton of friends in the area and I visited the city a lot. And this ride was really the first time I ever felt sad about not being close to the city after moving down to Orlando. I've also posted photos from the ride queue to my story from time to time and had friends who are from the city ask if I came back without telling them. For better or for worse, Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon may not have been the New York ride we wanted, but it's the ride we got. Jimmy himself had a ton of input and involvement in nearly every aspect of the ride, and I truly believe him when he talks about it. He speaks about the ride with this earnest that he's proven he can't fake. He worked on the ride with people he trusted and felt creatively safe with in his writers Gerard Bradford and Mike DeCenzo. They would work on the ride in the Tonight Show writers' room. Steve Higgins, the announcer for the show, does all the audio spiels for the ride instead of Jimmy when he easily could have done them. This wasn't just a situation where someone's name and show were slapped onto a ride. There was a true passion behind this that I think is admirable. At the same time, as much as I enjoy the story, there is this underlying corporate synergy feel that does permeate the ride, especially when the fourth wall is broken and Jimmy says we should sell these t-shirts. This kind of in-your-face synergy isn't uncommon for Comcast, especially with their de facto mascot Jimmy, but that doesn't make it less weird. In a world where we're constantly being advertised to, I'm able to get past this kind of corporate awkwardness, but it can take you out of the story, which is frustrating. In the long run though, I'm okay with this kind of trade-off with Universal Parks under Comcast. When you look back at where the parks were before them, it's night and day. For all their faults, Comcast has invested in these parks greatly and taken guest feedback seriously. The negative reaction to simulators directly led to more tangible rides such as Hagrid's and Velocicoaster, and then Epic Universe, which has only one ride that really heavily relies on screens. Comcast seems to have a much stronger grasp on how to run theme parks at the scale of Universal than I think anyone expected. While at the time many feared that Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon was the future of the parks being a corporate vessel, the reality is that it's the exception, and even in that corporate vessel, there was care taken to make it still a fun experience.
We here at NBC Universal are constantly working on new attractions for the Universal Orlando Resort based on our popular shows and movies. Here are just a few things we're creating for you. In 2012, The Celebrity Apprentice comes to life with a brand new ride. Get ready for huge heights and big falls on the Star Jones emotional roller coaster. Then you want to head over to our brand new stage show, The Biggest Loser Live, where you jog in place for 30 minutes, then you'll strip down to your underwear and weigh yourself in front of total strangers. And remember Caroline in the City? Just checking, you don't have a ride for that yet. But starting next month, you can ride the Today Show. Literally. Every day at noon, line up for piggyback rides from Ann Curry. NBC Universal. They can't all be as good as Harry Potter.
At this point, you're probably thinking, how is there still more to talk about with the Jimmy Fallon ride? To be honest, I'm just as shocked as you, but I think this story is about to get more interesting in the coming years. At the time Race Through New York opened, networks thought that late night as a format was one of their last remaining cash cows. The shows still had a timeliness, still drew in ratings, and enjoyed a strong second life on the internet. At a time when cable viewership was sinking like the Titanic, late night was one of very few exceptions. Specifically at NBC, there was even more hope as The Tonight Show made a decision to avoid getting into the more political direction that both CBS and ABC were taking at the time. But as time has gone on, the show has reversed that decision and has lost some of that squeaky clean shine it had when the ride opened. Jimmy Fallon's place in popular culture didn't withstand the changes in the last decade, and he isn't nearly as admired by general audiences as he was in 2017. At the same time, late night as a whole hasn't weathered the changing media landscape in the way networks hoped. While still finding success online and by no means a dead format, it's no longer the pop culture cornerstone it used to be. Pop culture used to start on late night and then be talked about the next day. With the loss of monoculture due to the rise of on-demand media, pop culture is no longer easily defined and shaped by media. These changes aren't slowing down, and so how late night adapts to try and capture the next generation of audiences is going to be interesting. There's also been rumors swirling that Jimmy Fallon himself may step down from The Tonight Show at the end of his current contract in 2028. While not unprecedented, this would be a very short run for a host not named Conan. When the ride was greenlit, Comcast viewed hosting The Tonight Show as essentially a lifetime appointment. Jay Leno hosted the show for 22 years, until he was 64 years old. If Jimmy left in 2028, he'd be over a decade younger. What seemed like a property that would last Universal at least 20 years might not last 10. What would the ride do if Jimmy Fallon stopped hosting The Tonight Show? Even if it's more of a tour of New York City, the entire framing device is so intrinsically tied to The Tonight Show. Could you rework it with a new host? Maybe. But would you take that risk again now knowing what you know about the future of late night? I also don't want it to seem like it'd be easy to do a swap of the ride media. Just because it's a screen doesn't mean it's easy to create and synchronize the media, the ride motion, and the theater effects. At the same time though, Universal invested so much money into the building and the ride just 8 years ago that I can't imagine them trying to start from zero. The most obvious option would be retheming the ride to its 30 Rock neighbor, SNL. As a part of that show's 50th anniversary celebrations, the Tonight Shop was essentially reworked into an SNL store that has outlived the finale of season 50. As much as I think SNL would provide a lot of opportunities for a similar good story, do you take the risk you did with The Tonight Show? SNL has also seemingly weathered the storm of the streaming era, but if you're Universal, are you confident enough in that lasting after being burned before? Then there's also what's going on with Rip Ride Rockit closing in August of this year. The ride literally wraps around Soundstage 50 and breaks through the old Ghostbusters facade next to Race Through New York's marquee. Whatever replaces it will not only determine the theme of the area the ride sits in, it'll also shape the layout of the land itself. The rumors of a Ghostbusters return would reinforce the New York theme and likely lock in the area's theme for decades to come, whereas if it went the Fast and Furious direction, it's a lot less clear. Universal's also continued to chip away at the production central theme over the years, with the Minion invasion spreading all the way down to across the intersection from Fallon's marquee. All of this making the future of Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon more unclear than one would expect for a ride that opened just over 8 years ago.
Do you remember the phone call? Do you remember the video conferencing?
I remember it like it was yesterday.
I remember going like, here's my idea. My name's Jimmy Fallon, and I have this idea for a ride. And I told you the whole idea, and you go, yeah, that's great, yeah. No. No, but good luck, whatever you're doing. What's your name again? I go, it's Jimmy Fallon. You go, yeah, good. You go, yeah, and you go, good luck. If you ever need any passes, let me know.
It was something like that,
no,
but not
something
that bad.
like that, but it's not that bad.
And you pitched that story. It was a great story. But then we just didn't have a spot at the time. So then what? Fast forward 6 years?
6 years later, you go, hey,
remember
do we want to make that? Yeah, you remember that? I go, yeah, let's talk, let's play. And I got to be honest, I can't believe that you made all this. I mean, every idea that we pitched, you said yes to, and you made it happen.
Can we do this? Can we fly down there? Can we get pizza? I was like, yeah, we can do that. What else you got?
Can we go to the moon? And you go, yeah, we can go to the moon.
Some people are like, oh, I don't know if we can go to the moon. I said, of course we can go to the moon. That's what we do.
Race Through New York starring Jimmy Fallon was a misunderstood ride from the start. It continually found itself in the middle of transitions. Not just transitions in the park or theme, transitions in the company and pop culture as a whole. The ride was not just caught in the death of simulators, it was also caught in the death of late night. The ride struck fears into people who thought the Comcast takeover of Universal would lead to blatant corporate advertising at every turn, and cheap simulator attractions becoming the only type of rides at their parks. In reality, the ride has more heart than anyone expected, and was a sign of Comcast utilizing the Universal Orlando Resort as a weapon to soften their public image. However, the ride is one of very few that Comcast doesn't have full control over. When you make a ride about a movie, your main concern is the property fading from consumer interest. Actors don't leave movies after they're filmed. But late night hosts leave, and the show can remain relevant without them. But you wouldn't want a Jay Leno themed ride at a theme park today. Basing a ride off such a unique property was an interesting risk, but it's one I'm glad Universal took. While it may have a murky future, I think we owe the ride a bit more respect. It could have been phoned in and a sign of a resort in decline, but it was a part of the story of a resort on the rise. The lessons Comcast and Universal learned about theme parks at the time Race to New York was under development created the conditions for the golden age of Universal rides we've been seeing since. So, thank you, Jimmy Fallon, I guess.
It's not?
You got a really cool thing coming up at Universal Orlando.
It's kind of insane. Yeah, we have our own ride. I have my own
race through New York. How did you get that?
It's the weirdest thing ever. What is your favorite roller coaster ride? Do you have a favorite ride?
Matterhorn.
It's better than that.
It was the Back to the Future ride.
It's close to that, but it's summer.
Just when you thought nobody listens to you around here.
Took 3 years, but boom.
Exactly.
Wait, this might steal people from our plaza who come here to see the real deal. They're going to go to Orlando now and ride Jimmy's ride.
It's good too because if it's raining or something like that, you can take this ride.
You can still do it.
It's indoors.
And if it works, race through New York with the Today Show team.
There you go. Let's do it. Let's do this.
Thanks for setting the stage.
Thank
Jimmy,
you.
good to see you, man.
Always great to see you.
Thank you for watching what will probably be my longest video yet, somehow. And of all things, it's about Race to New York starring Jimmy Fallon. So if you liked it, like the video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments why I'm wrong about liking this ride. I did for this video watch like some episodes live just to get a feel for the show outside of like the YouTube clips, and it ended up becoming a little bit of a habit. So hopefully you guys like this video because I'm now paying for cable for another year at this point. So yeah, otherwise that's all I have. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.
So people stand in line and they watch your show. It's actually brilliant.